All right. So now let's see this particular question. Equal point in a string of brackets, right? So in this question, we are given an input string, right? And this input string is purely made of opening and closing brackets, right? It can have only two characters, either an opening bracket or a closing bracket. And apart from these two characters, it cannot have any third character, right? So that is the format of the input string. Now what we need to do is we need to find an equal point, a point of equilibrium basically in this particular string, such that, I mean, the definition of that equal point is that the number of opening braces towards the left of that particular point or that particular index is exactly equal to the number of closing braces towards the right of this particular point, including this particular point, right? So all the opening braces towards the left of it, excluding this particular point, this particular index, and the number of closing braces towards the right of this particular index, including this particular index, right? These two values should be equal, right? And I just need to return the index of such a point in this particular string, right? And if I find multiple such indexes, right, where the number of opening braces towards the left and the closing braces towards the right are equal, I can just return the first such index, right, where this condition is met, right? So that is the question entirely. Now if you see this particular example test case, what we are saying is that this is my input string, right? And if you see over here, if you see this particular index over here, this one, so the number of closing braces towards the right of this particular point, including this particular point, is actually 2, right? 1 and 2, right? These two, including, because see, closing braces towards the right, we also have to include the index itself, right? And hence I'm getting 2 closing braces, right? And if I talk about the opening braces towards the left, there are just 1 and 2 opening braces again, right? So that means the number of opening braces equal to the number of closing braces at this particular point, and hence this is my equal point, right? And this is the first such index, right? There is no such index which satisfies this condition towards the left of this particular index, and hence this will be my output, right? The index of this particular point will be my output, and that is 4, right? So this is what I need to do in this particular problem. This is what I need to find out, right? Now maybe you can just pause this particular video and think of a solution, and once you are done, you can just come back and check the solution. Okay, so now to solve this particular question, see, what we essentially need to do is we need to iterate over this particular array, and then at every point, at every index, I need to first of all know what is my total number of opening braces till that particular point, right? Or towards the left of that particular point, before that particular point, right? At every index, I need to first of all know the number of brackets, opening brackets towards the left, and I also want to know the number of closing brackets towards the right, right? At every point. And then I can basically compare these two quantities, and whenever they are equal, I can just return that first such index, right? But now to calculate the number of opening brackets towards the left of any point, that is actually easy. So basically, whenever I'm encountering any opening bracket, I will just maintain a variable and I will just keep incrementing the value of that particular variable by 1 every time, right? So that will just track the number of opening brackets that I have seen so far till any point of index over here, and that will essentially be the total number of opening brackets that I have seen towards the left of that particular point, right? Sitting at any given point, right? So that is easy to find the number of opening brackets towards the left, right? But now to calculate the number of closing brackets towards the right, I need to have a way to actually look forward, look ahead, right? Which is not that easy, right? So to do that, what we can do is we can actually try to do a little trick over here, right? So if I talk about the number of closing brackets towards the right, that would essentially be the total number of closing brackets that I have in this particular string minus the total number of closing brackets towards the left of the point that I am at right now, right? So for example, if I want to calculate the total number of closing brackets towards the right of this particular point, what I can do is I can just subtract the total number of closing brackets towards the left of it, right, from the total number of closing brackets that I have in this particular array totally, right? And That way, I will just be left with the total number of closing brackets only towards the right of this particular point, right? And that will solve my purpose, right? And again, getting the total number of closing brackets towards the left of any point, we can just follow the same approach, right? We know how to do that as we are doing in the case of the opening brackets also, right? So that is simple. So all what we need to do is, first of all, I can just do one iteration to find the total number of closing brackets in this entire array. I can just parse this particular entire array, completely, and then I can find the number of closing brackets in this entire array, right? And then I can have the second iteration where I will just keep checking the number of, basically I will keep incrementing the opening brackets variable by 1 every time I encounter a opening bracket, right? And I will just keep reducing the number of closing brackets in that closing brackets variable that I am maintaining by 1 whenever I am encountering a closing bracket, right, in my second iteration, right? So that way, at any given point in time, these two variables will hold the number of opening brackets towards the left of that particular point and the number of closing brackets towards the right of that particular point, right? So I hope you understood this concept, right? Maybe we can do a back tracing quickly of one of the example. So for example, over here, if I am now sitting at this particular point, which is basically my answer over here. So if I'm sitting at this particular point, that is index 4. So what will I have, right? So I will have the opening braces over here equal to 1 and 2, right? And the closing braces would be basically, if you check over here, if I now just count the number of closing braces first completely in this particular array, it would be 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I have total 4 closing braces in this entire array. So it will be 4 minus the number of closing braces that I have encountered till this particular point. And that is only 1, if you see over here, right? Or sorry, that is equal to 2, right? Because I'm sitting over here at this particular point and I've already encountered 2 closing braces, right? So that's why I will just do 4, which is my total number of closing braces, minus 2, which is the total number of closing braces that I have seen so far till this particular point, right? And that will give me the total number of closing braces towards the right of this particular point, right? Including this point, of course, right? So that will be 1 and 2, and that's what I'm getting over here, right? And this point, at this particular point, if you see, my opening brackets is equal to my closing brackets, and that's why this is going to be my output, right? So this is the simple observation that we had to follow to solve this particular question. And now see, talking about the time complexity, we are just scanning this particular array twice, right? We are just iterating over this particular array twice. So it will be order of 1, it will be linear time complexity, right? And talking about the space complexity, we are not at all using any extra space over here. We are just using 2 variables to basically track the number of opening and the closing brackets. So that will be again constant, it will be order of 1, right? So my time complexity will be order of n and my space complexity will be order of 1, right? So that's the solution entirely. I hope you understood it well, and this is a common pattern. It can be extended to other problems as well, or it could be used as a pattern in solving some other complex questions as well, right? So this is a good trick to keep in your mind, to have it handy, and that's why I just selected this particular question, right? So that's it. Now maybe we can just jump to our IDE and code this particular solution. Alright, so now let's implement the solution that we just discussed, right? So first of all, to begin with, let me just declare a function and name it as find index maybe, right? And this will accept a string, which will be my string of brackets, right? str. And now what I can do is, I can just declare my opening braces variable, right? And also my closing braces variable, like this, and initialize both of them to 0, right? And I will be using these 2 variables to basically track the number of opening braces that I have seen towards the left of any index, and also calculate the number of closing braces that I have towards the right of this particular index, the current index that I am at, right? Including that particular index, right? So these 2 variables I will be using for that purpose, as we had discussed earlier also, right? And now what I can do is I can just capture the length of this particular string in a variable n, right? And now what I need to do is, I first of all need to count the total number of closing braces that I have entirely in this complete array, right, in this complete string, right? So for that, what I can do is I can just iterate over this particular string completely, right? And whenever I encounter, you know, a closing braces like this, a closing bracket basically like this, I can just increment my closing braces value by 1, right? And so in this way, at the end of this particular for loop, I will have the total count of the closing braces that I have completely in this particular input string, right? Now what I need to do is I have to again iterate over this particular array, and this time at every index I first need to calculate the number of opening braces that I have towards the left of that particular index that I am at currently, and also calculate the total number of closing braces that I would have towards the right of that particular index, and of course including that particular index, right? So that's what I have to do at every index. And for that, what now I can do is I can just run a for loop again over this particular string, right, like this. And now whenever I encounter, you know, a opening brace, what I can do is like this. If this is equal to opening brace, then I can just increment my opening braces value by 1 like this. And in case I encounter a closing brace at this particular index, then I can just decrement my closing braces value by 1 like this, right? So that's what I have to do. And this way, at every index or at current index I will have the total number of opening braces that I have towards the left of I in this opening braces variable, and also I will have the total number of closing braces towards the right of I in this closing braces variable, right? So that's what I'm trying to do over here. And now see, in every iteration of this particular for loop, I will also keep checking if my opening braces and my closing braces at this particular index are equal, right? Because if they are equal, I can just return this particular index as my output, because this will be my equal point where I'm saying my closing braces towards the right of this particular index is equal to the number of opening braces towards the left of this particular index, right? And hence what I can do is at the top of this particular for loop, before actually doing these operations, I can just check if my opening braces value is equal to my closing braces value at this particular index. In that case, I will just return this current index I as my final output, right? Now you might be wondering one thing, that why do we have to do this particular check of comparing the opening braces with the closing braces before actually incrementing the opening braces value and before decrementing the closing braces value, right? Now see, we have to do this particular check before incrementing the opening braces value, because see, if I do this particular check after I increment the opening braces value, it would mean that I'm actually including the current opening brace also, which is present in the current index also, in my opening braces value, right? Which is wrong, because I only have to include the opening braces that I have only towards the left of this particular index, right? And also I have to do this check before this closing braces decrement operation that I'm doing, because again, if I do it after I am decrementing my closing braces value by 1, it would mean that I'm not including the closing brace that I have at the current index, right? But actually, to calculate the total number of closing braces towards the right of this particular index, I also have to include the closing brace that I have at the current index, right? So that's the difference, and that's why I have to do this particular check before actually I'm doing both of these operations, right? So that's the simple logic that we have to follow over here. I hope you understood it, right? And see, now once I come out of this for loop, and if I'm not able to return any index in this particular for loop in any iteration for any index, it would mean that I don't have any equal point in my input string at all, right? And in that case, I can just return -1, right? So you can just check the problem statement again. They have said that if you are not able to find any equal point in your input string, you can just return a default output of -1, right? So that's what I'm doing over here. In case I don't find any such index in my for loop, I will come out of it and I will just return -1, right? So that's the entire solution completely. If you see from top to bottom completely, this is the entire solution. I hope you understood it well, right? Now maybe what we can do is we can quickly test this particular solution on a sample test case that we also saw earlier, right? So that was actually this one, like this. and a opening brace at the end, right? This was the input string that we had seen, and the output of this particular function on this particular string should be 4, as we had seen. It should be this particular value, because at this particular index, if you see, we have two closing braces towards the right of this particular index, including this particular index, right? 1 and 2. And if you see about the opening braces towards the left, we have exactly two opening braces as well towards the left of this particular index, right? And hence this is my equal point, right? So this should be my output. So now let me just print the output of this find index function over this particular input string that we have, this one, right? And now my output should be hopefully 4, right? Let me run it again, and I get it as 4, right? So this is the correct output that we were looking for, and this is the solution entirely. And again, just repeating on the time complexity and the space complexity. The time complexity over here, as you can see, we are just doing couple of scans over the entire string, right? So it will be linear time complexity, it will be order of n, right? And talking of the space complexity, we are not at all using any extra space over here, we are just using these two variables, and so it will be order of 1, right? So that's it about this particular solution. But before we close this particular video, I just also want to call out that there is, you know, one variation, very small variation of this particular problem which is available on few of the coding platforms. I just wanted to, you know, call that out because you might encounter it, right? And in that particular variation, what they are saying is that, let's take an example. For example, my input string is this, right? A single character closing brace, sorry, opening brace, right? Or let me take a closing brace over here, right? So I just have a single closing brace in my input string, right? Now if I run this particular function for this particular input string, my output will be -1, right? Which is actually true as per our understanding, because see, there is no equal point in this particular array, in this particular string, right? There is just one index which is 0, and sitting on 0, if you see, I have towards the right, including this particular point, I have exactly one closing brace, right? Which is this one itself, and I have 0 opening braces towards the left of it, right? And hence my opening brace is not equal to the value of my closing braces, right? And this is, since this is the only index, there is no other index to check, my output should be actually -1, which makes all the sense in the world. But there are few coding platforms which have a little variation where they are expecting that you should also see the next index over here, right? After, you know, you have completely looked at all the characters of the string, you should go to the next index, right? And check over there that if you are now getting the value of the opening braces equal to the closing braces, right? So if we follow that, if I go to the next index over here after this particular, you know, point that I have already seen, if I come over here, the number of closing braces that I have towards the right of this particular index would be actually 0, right? Because it's an empty string, right? So that's why it will be 0, and I don't have at all any closing, or sorry, the opening braces towards the left or in this entire string. So opening braces value is anyway 0, right? So at this particular point, which is the next point after the last index of this particular string, where my this particular condition is meeting, right? And hence that can be my output, right? That should be my output basically. That is a variation that you might find over the internet if you search for this particular problem, if you try to practice this particular problem, right? So you will have to handle that particular case, that you will also have to select the, or you also have to check for the last, like the next point after the last index of the input string, right? If at that particular index, if your closing braces value and the opening braces value is matching, then too you might want to just return that particular point as your output, right? So in this particular problem, or in this particular example, my output would be actually 1, right? So there is no one index over here present in this particular string, there is just 0 index, but then still at sitting at index 1, if there had been a 1 index, then I would have got the equal point at that particular index, and so my output should be 1, right? So maybe you can just try to handle this particular small variation, this small corner case in your code. You can just try to think about it and try to implement that in this particular code. It will be a very small change, it will be a very small addition. You just have to think where to add that particular change and you will be good. So you can just try it first on your own to handle, and then you can check your solution. If you have any confusion, I'm sure you won't have any confusions over here. If you give it a little thought, you will get it. But in case if you want to refer, you can refer the link that I'm going to share in the description of this particular video, right? So that's it for this particular video, and now I will see you in the next one. Thank you.